let's continue in our research of making the perfect tree and shrubbery and pieces for game art. If you are a game designer, you will want to follow this to create your own types of foliage and trees. We have particle brushes here, and we have foliage brushes. And we've seen that we can use the foliage brushes with some of the presets. If you click on load, and maybe you need a branch in the foreground and there are some sort of flowers growing on that, and give it a second and it will do the final render. This is typical for these brushes, is that there is a sort of a post rendering phase to it. The rules will make the big branch turn out into smaller branches, and then smaller twigs and very fine ones, and then eventually have some sort of a flower or set of leaves on top of it. And some of these presets will follow the mouse, and so as you go around like this, it bends with it, and that's a good way to create something a little bit different from just a predefined image. But as an asset for your game design, if you want to put that on a polygon, like a billboard polygon, you'll need to, of course, have it turn the object in the background transparent, have the white color transparent. And that's really easily done. You simply select the Create Alpha option here and do one brush stroke until you have the right type of foliage, and you'll see that with the alpha enabled, it will have the marching ants showing. And so now you can simply pick this up as a brush right here, pick it up as a custom brush, and if you preview it, click the PRV and disable the particle, you can see now it's your brush image. You can store that, store it. If it is not fully opaque here and you want to see it fully opaque, just adjust the opacity here. There you go. And you can paint it and dab it a few times. You can change the background color to see what it looks like against a different background color. And you might notice that it has a little bit of a white edge because of that transparency being a gradual thing, a transition with anti-aliasing. So it doesn't just transition to transparency in a gradual way, but it also transitions to with the color. The color is also showing gradually through that. So we might need to adjust and compensate for that. We can do that here with the brush where is it? Pre-multiply correction, that's the function, and indicating that the background color used to be white and we want to get rid of that white edge. And so now we have a version of it that if we paint it, on black background, you no longer see those white edges. And so that's a good piece of artwork to retain, and you'll want to probably save it directly like that as a PNG file and start using it in your game developer environment or in your 3D environment. I mean, we're talking also Carrara and other 3D programs where you need some extra foliage that you can images that you can use in compositing your ultimate piece of artwork. So for instance, you might want to store this one here again, and you have now this piece of brush that you can use in many different ways. One is also to horizontally flip it, so you click it once to dab it like that, perhaps a bit on the side, like so, and then you hit the X key to flip it horizontally and have it on the other side here too. And or you could perhaps composite it with let's say if you render a sky, something like this here, and use that as the background, and now let's just put that in the foreground. And so many different ways to put that to good use, but the question really is, how do we create these in the first place? And that's what the focus is on this series of creating art pieces for the game industry. And so what I'll do is explore a few more of these presets and what we can do, especially when we enable particles to be deflected by the force field. As we saw in the prior tutorial, when you enable a force field, this image you currently have is what will be looked at, will be considered a a displacement map or a force field to reckon with. And so if, for instance, I use even a piece of shrubbery like that, and then I activate the force field, give it a few seconds, now I have this image used as a force field, which means I can also erase this image. I don't need it anymore. The force field effect is still there, and therefore if I start painting on it, it is going all over the map because it's deflecting the particles as they are starting on their journey. If you disable the force field, as you can see here, if I take the power away, nothing happens, nothing seems to be present there, and the particles look great, but we might want them to look even greater, so play with that. Try with the force field power, try with the drag, the force drag, to contain it a little bit more. And soon enough you'll be creating new types of shrubbery, perhaps also adding some changes in the colors. Let's say here, adding some color hue. You want to make it more like dry shrubbery, or a little bit more of a reddish tint. There's the post effect. There you go, the post effect pass. Maybe the color hue, the fog also, tint color, there it is. So color hue is basically coloring based on the distance. And that can be very useful to add a bit of depth as well. But even without that, without the color hue, if you look at the tint color, you might say, well, let's give it a little bit of a reddish tint or orange, and then the entire experience is going to be colorized a bit that way. And let's see if I need to add a few more. Oh, the fog amount also. So you can give it some fog. But the amount of fog that you get can be still modulated here, so you could say a lot of it or just a little bit, and so that will also create yet again a different resulting tree. See, this one is much more dry looking, and just by virtue of giving it that tint or the fog color on top. So that's important to remember too. If you have a game in which it's dry land and a lot of sandstone, reddish colors, and you want to make it look like there really isn't a whole lot of vegetation growing, and the little bit of vegetation that was there is drying out, you can convey that impression, or you can make it look like that by tinting the brushes accordingly, and to having the shrubbery and the brush and the grass and all that stuff get a little bit more of a reddish or a dry brownish color as well. There is also some control here of the maximum lifespan that will make the trees a little bit shorter, very shorter, as you can see here, and then also it can make it longer lived. You can change also the initial size, the pen size, so you can make them much thinner. And just that alone also, again, combined with the power of the force field, so many more types of vines perhaps. Let's say we want to give it a bit more of a greenish appearance now, so we'll go to a fog color that is kind of a green, dark green, perhaps a nicely saturated green, and we'll start seeing some vines coming out of that are climbing up the trees. So now let's say, for instance, we wanted actually some of these to be contained inside the grooves of a brick wall. So let's say I'm going to take a very simple brick wall. I'm going to render the brick wall. Where is it? Oh, I guess we could use the grid, or we could use, I thought I had a brick wall here somewhere. There, brick texture. Okay, so this one's not very fancy. It lacks the texture, paper texture we could enable. There's so much more we can add to that, but just to get started, let's go and free this force field and go back to the particle settings and actually use this as a force field. So uncheck and then recheck the force field button. It grabs this now as your force field, and if you draw your foliage, still the same tree across it here. Right now it doesn't look like it's heavily influenced by that, but if you go and increase the power, that's where you'll start seeing it divert and go back and forth. Now I need to also have a clean copy of this before I'm starting to put the shrubbery on it. So let's go and store an image, store image copy, and that way whenever I do something and I say no, not quite ready yet, just click here to restore it. That's a very quick way to, especially if you have more than one levels of undo, right? If you do this a few times and you don't want to go click, undo several times until you're back to the original, all you got to do is just click this once and it puts that back in place. And again, this could be an image that's a little bit more sophisticated with maybe a bit of embossing. Let's do that. Let's select the white part here, the mortar, and do that from the selection by lights. And the light parts are selected, and now we can do a little bit of embossing. We could do selection effects, emboss by alpha, and see if we can get it a little bit more. Actually, we need to emboss it the other way, I guess. So we need to, because now it looked like the white part was sticking out. We want the white part, the mortar, to be more receded and the bricks to stick out. So let me invert the selection. And that's that, and now we can do the embossing the way we probably meant to do it. Emboss by alpha, and not too much of it. There you go. So now we have that, and let's see what else we could actually, while we have the reddish part selected, also add a bit of paper texture to it. That will make it look like we do have more realistic looking bricks that are porous, with some granularity to it. We probably want to, because we've added that embossing, you see the shaded side here, you see the lit side there, maybe we need to prevent that from being affected by the porous, the part that we'll be adding. Let's shrink the alpha a little bit. Before we do that though, let's just keep a selection of it, copy and store the alpha, just in case we need to get back to that later on in this original shape and form. So what I'll do now is, let's see, we currently have the part we have selected right now, just to be sure, under the selection menu we can see is, yeah, what turns pink is not selected, so that's the darker part you see here in the stored copy. Those are the parts where the white mortar is showing. And so the parts that are selected is the reddish part and the bricks, and we need to shrink the selection a little bit so that we're not going to have too much of that texture showing along the shaded and the lit part. Although it probably, frankly, wouldn't really hurt too much, but it's good to really kind of focus on that texture showing on the flat side here. Will be probably simply take the selection and shrink it a little bit with the shrink alpha. There it is, by 1 unit, perhaps even one more. Let's do selection shrink one more time, and so we have now contained this selection to pretty much the part that is facing us, not the sides, not the shaded or lit side of it, but just the part that is facing us. And if we want, we can also do a little bit of softening on that, so blurring with the box filter alpha or the Gaussian blur alpha, just a tiny little bit, right? We don't need a lot of it, just 1 or 2 units should be just fine. And let's go something like this here. So that way we have a little bit of a transition on that selection. Now we can place the paper texture in here. Now how do we do that? This icon here in the upper right, the middle icon, represents the paper texture. You can click it to enable it so that it's active for the next tools that you're using. So if you're using a paintbrush, you will have the paper texture in it. If you're using a fill tool, it will have the paper texture in it. A variety of tools can use that paper texture. But you can also see the paper textures right here at the top, or probably up here somewhere there will be papers, or actually it will show the moment you have a tool in use that can use it. So the brush typically can, and you can click the paper texture to see that panel of additional controls. And there may be some paper textures that are particularly useful. You will, for instance, find some of those that look like tarp, not so much what we need, but there are some that are a bit more like rock looking, and what I'll do is I'll use one of those. You can set the amount of relief, you can set the scale of it, so they will change the size of that paper texture appearing here. And then perhaps what we can do is use the fill tool. Now the fill tool, when we click inside the area of the brick, it will fill it with the current color, which is kind of a greenish part, and so that's not perfect quite yet. What I'd like to do, let's go undo that, make it a little bit less relief, a little bit less on the size. Try that. That's probably better. It's not perfect on the color yet, but we'll work on that. In fact, on the primary color, I'll just click that primary color and kind of make it a reddish tint as well. Something like this, and see, that's already better. Now I have too much of a sharp edge here on that transition. I probably needed to blur that some more. So let's go and make the selection a little bit more blurry. Let's use the Gaussian blur this time, and perhaps something like this. Let's see where that gets us. Somewhat better. We could probably maybe we didn't need to shrink it that much. Let's go in and expand now. Let's go grow the alpha. I kind of go the other way. It's not always really linear, but we might be able to. We might be somewhat lucky here. Let's go one or two more units. Grow alpha some more. Let's go a little bit too far perhaps. Okay, well that will do, just to get an idea on how to approach that. And what I'll do now is to try to apply that fill all over the image. There are a couple of shortcuts here under the image menu. The fill tool, you can do a fill, you can do a paint fill, adjustable paint fill, and there's a few more for other purposes. Let's do the Q as in quick fill, and that applies it all over wherever the selection lets it. Alright, so that's a quick and easy way to do that. Now you might want to add even more lighting and shading to that. So you could possibly, let's say we get rid of the selection, store it just in case you decide you want to get back to it, clear the selection, and you have this brick and this brick wall now where we have already some nice 3D look to it, but it might be better to give it even a little bit more additional lighting. And before I do that, I'm going to say this is really a good starting point for my force field. So I'm going to free the force field I currently have. I'm going to store this image, because certainly that took a few clicks to create, and I want to be able to get back to that in a hurry. This one I probably don't need anymore. This is going to be the force field we use. So let's go to particles and click uncheck the force field to get rid of the old one, and then re-click it. That will now grab this as a force field. Now we're not done on the colors itself. The force field is good, but we need to add a little bit of shading on colors. So let's go here and do the stylize lighting tool, and we can put the light perhaps right at above, because the sky is shining from above, and the light distance could be a little bit farther away. We could have the light itself be somewhat more colored, so the light color here, perhaps a little bit of a bluish tint. That will give it kind of more of a skylight effect. Make sure you don't give it too much texture height. You might give it a wet look by increasing the specularity, a bit of a specular gloss to it. Let's see, what else could we do here. This one here, multiply to the original, right? So if you multiply with the original color, you'll see more of that reddish. And so here now you have some fine control of how much lighting you want, how much depth to that texture, and that will affect sort of the shading. Now you could also do that with the ray tracer in PuppyRay. You can do a lot of that pretty quickly with the GPU version. But this one is interesting too, because you can give some local lights, more like spotlights. You can make them go very close. Let's see, what else could we do here. Oh, add another light source. Now check what happens when you add another light source. It's actually putting that in a new layer. There will be a new layer appearing over here. This is layer 0 right now here, and I'm going to add a light, and this light is going to be more of a dark blue, maybe a little bit purple appearance. There you go, and you see that it's right here, layer 1 now. Now the position of this, is going to be lower. And you notice there's a difference between the resulting image here and the preview here. It shows you where the first light source was placed, but it's only using or showing you the layer of this light source, so that you can really focus on what the position of that one is by itself. Even though there are other light sources in the final composition, this light source is the one we're currently worried about and focusing on, so we can bring it in closer, we can make it bigger, brighter, we can have it a little bit lower down here. And the intensity of this might not be what we keep in the final. So we can go and say, yes, that's good, let's keep it that way, perhaps even a little bit more on the extrusion for that, texture height, less on the specularity, all sorts of different fine tunes we can do different from this texture or for this light source than for the other light source. And then when you OK that, you now have control of these two layers, and the top layer, layer 1, controls this second light source. So you can adjust that a little bit here too now. And the composition mode of this layer could be vivid light, it could be soft light, it could be hard light, soft light, there it is. So all sorts of different effects you can get with this. Fine tune it and then just merge it into a single one. Flatten this, right? Merge with next layer, merge down. And so now you have a single image. Let's store that. Here it is, image, store image copy. That's great. That's what we want the texture to look like. But we still have the original, this one here, that we use as the force field. The force field is active. And so let's see what it can do for us when we have some shrubbery or trees affected by it. Right? So we have the force field. Let's say we set the force field really strong, and we draw our tree that we had a little bit earlier, and we need to enable it right there. So now you see that it's going in ways very different from the original because the force field is acting on this. Let's go and restore this and just go very quickly like this. And that's how you can go and make it look like it's seeking out those trails from the brick wall. Let's say we want that brick wall to be a little bit more reddish. Let's change the hue. Let's go to the filters and adjust color or hue saturation value. The hue, we can certainly give it a little bit more of a reddish, more saturation. There you go. And a bit more brightness. And to your heart's delight, really, pretty much. And perhaps add also a better balance here, expanding the dynamic range, and also add a little bit of softness to it with the photographic soft contrast improvement, perhaps. That one often creates very dramatic, nice results. And there is another option too, which is the light diffusion. Anything that's bright should be kind of bleeding into the darker side. And that's a good one to keep. Let's go store that. Let's go to store image copy. And so we have this one now, and let's go one more time with our shrubbery across that and see if we can even contain it some more. So let's see what we need on those on that tree foliage brush to make it look even better. So we have the tint color, we have the fog color, we have color Q that will give it a bit of distance. Let's see, and maybe that's the secondary color we need to adjust here. So let's go to that and check this. So yeah, we have some coloring that's not quite perfect with the Q here now. What I think what we'll do is we'll get rid of that and see if that's indeed the culprit. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Let's see, what else can we do? Perhaps just work with the force field a little bit. Let's see the drag really high and the force a little bit less. So there you go. That's really nice. You know, if you start on the inside of the bricks, let's say here, it will eventually find its way to one of those the wider parts, the lighter parts on around the bricks. And if you start already there, then it's pretty much contained in there, especially if you have very strong force and drag, or just the drag maybe is needed for that. So it's quite easy to contain it like that. Now, one of the fun things with this is that you can actually animate that. Alright, so I'm going to finish this tutorial by showing kind of this foliage growing up over an animation. And the way to do that is to find the right parameters so that as you're drawing this, it's growing to the right amount. Maybe we need to give it more longevity. Let's do the maximum lifespan a little bit bigger. Let's give it 999. Let's see what that looks like. Perhaps a little bit more on the power and a little bit less on the drag, so it can reach out farther. And so we could use that. Let's use this particular, which brick did we want to use? This one here, and go click quickly from the lower left to the upper right. Alright, in one brush stroke. Let's do that even faster. Undo that. There you go, and just keep drawing. Oh, that was too fast. Oh, you know what? Let's use a different brush. Instead of the foliage brush, let's go back to the particle brushes. Click on that, which disables the foliage brush. And so here, what we could do is use a load also, but some of the previews we have here, like the lichen. Let's see what the lichen looks like. Okay, and so for this one, we'll give it a much longer lifespan. Let's give it 237. So now you see it keeps going and going and going, and it gradually changes the color. But these things are going to keep moving. Really interesting until they die off. Hold the shift key, as we saw in the last tutorial, to kind of finish it off without re-branching or re-splitting into new sets. So that's an interesting one to use. Now I'm going to try to animate something like this. So let's set the initial size to much smaller. Let's undo this and do something like this. Okay, that will look good. Let's go now simply stop drawing, hold the press. Okay, so I'm going to do one brush stroke doing this. Right, so I'm going to say start drawing and then hold the shift key down, and it will be done with one brush stroke. Done. Okay, now this brush stroke I can have it replayed across an animation. So I'm going to go back to the state where we don't see the brush yet. I make sure I don't draw another brush stroke, but I'm going to repeat. I'm going to create the animation here and say let's test it with 66 frames that are going to play at 30 frames a second. And now use the stroke player right there to say this most recent brush stroke, I'd like to replay it. And I'd like to have it spread across all frames of the animation. Now that's not going to make it look like it's growing, it's going to make it look like it's animating. So perhaps since we will be experimenting here, I need to store the current animation, which is not really showing much change, but I want to store that in memory. And if it fits in memory, that's great. If it doesn't, we'll keep it in on disk. And oh, there it is. I didn't realize I had it right there already. So this animation really doesn't have anything showing yet, but now I can go and replay into this animation the current frame. Let's just look at it on the current frame. That's the first frame, and let's go and replay it here. So replay that. You see this most recent brush stroke being replayed there, and it's seeking out the parts. Maybe we need them a little bit bigger, a little bit more intense, some more gain. And let's replay that one more time. Again, this is on the current frame right now. And maybe we'll say, okay, that's good, but it's not what we need. So let's go find our stored animation. There it is, restored animation. And this time we'll go and play it across all frames as an animation. Okay, so there it is. Now this looks like it's not doing a whole lot. I'm zoomed in and the action is a little bit on the left side. Let me zoom out and replay it there. Actually, maybe I lost that brush stroke. I don't know. Let me just recreate a new one here. Wait, where's my force field? Did my force field go away? I don't think so. Okay, so you know what? I'm going to give it a bit more here. Yeah, my force field seems to have vanished. Alright, so let's just recreate a new one. Let's go free the force field. Let's go back to the particle brushes. Here they are. Let's say we want that force field again. And there it is. And this time we should be fine. Yep, there it is. And perhaps a little bit more and a little bit more contained. More force drag, so more force to go out. And try with these also. There's the slope, the value is really good many times. That gives some great control as well, or opposite of control, right? Typically what we want is not the control on this. Let's say we want this. Now we want to have that spread across the entire animation, right? So I think it was this image here. For the first frame, and then clear it, go all across the entire animation, and there you go. So now what you see is that the particles are being rendered frame by frame. And that's not exactly what I wanted to see. They're being animated. You can play the animation now, and you can see how it's moving. And the more you render it, the more it looks like there is some connection between them. But still, it's a series of dabs, and you don't want these dabs to be just moving along like individual vehicles. You want them to connect together. And there is an embedded mode, there is a Hancock mode. That's the mode I'm looking for. The Hancock mode is going to render what's been rendered in the past frame, and then it's going to render the next frame, and then it's going to repeat that again and again to gradually build up a longer image sequence. Now this is going to take more and more time. Be patient here, be careful. It's also going to stop at one point with the updating. The refresh is not going to keep going for every frame. But keep going and wait. You can see probably some feedback up here on which frame you are, or maybe you'll see that over here. Frame 19 of 66, frame 20 of 66, frame 21, and as I said, that's going to take quite a while. It's going to get longer and slower with each next frame, because it has to re-render the prior frames as well. But it's going to give you this appearance of growth that's actually animated and leaving a trail of what it has grown so far. As the next frame is built, it will have that as well, and it's actually something that looks great not only on a brick wall but also by itself. We'll do one or two to finish this, where you see the same particles kind of go out in space in darkness. It leaves some really interesting looking animations that we can then perhaps add some glow or ghosting to it, and motion blur, and all sorts of other effects to make it look like a very mysterious glow light or fire in the sky. Alright, so I think we have a few more things to experiment with here, hopefully some ideas that you can take further, and some of that, put that into good use for your game design as well. Alright, thanks for watching.